Congressman-elect in Central Illinois, and we're sitting down with Darren LaHood. Plus, state senators return to Springfield. Did they get any closer to ending the budget stalemate? And Senate Democrats have the votes to stop Republicans from blocking the Iran nuclear deal, the impact it's having on Capitol Hill.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. The election is over, the dust has settled, and Darren LaHood is the congressman-elect in the state's 18th district. Our Hannah Hilliard caught up with LaHood on election night.
With hundreds of supporters around, it took less than 2 hours after the polls closed.
Welcome, Darren LaHood.
For Darren LaHood to give his acceptance speech.
This is a victory for you tonight and the people in this district that have been without a voting representative for the last 6 months.
That lack of representation was felt throughout the 18th district.
Just really not having an ability to have a leader to go to help navigate complicated federal issues or constituent casework.
But not any longer. LaHood won decisively over Democratic opponent Rob Mellon, now sending LaHood to Washington, D.C.
And we felt like we had a strong message, and obviously it resonated with the voters here tonight.
When it comes to priorities, LaHood says tackling the nation's debt is at the top of his list, and finding a way to pay to fix America's roads and bridges. But he wouldn't be a Central Illinois representative without supporting the farming industry.
You got to support agriculture. We have to do everything we can, whether that's more trading for our agricultural products. I think that has to be a big part of that. Supporting ag is key.
While Thursday's victory means months of campaigning is over, his job has really just begun.
It's kind of like you're at the top of the mountain, but now there's another mountain in the horizon.
In Peoria, Hannah Hilliard, WMBD News.
The results have yet to be certified. Democratic candidate Rob Mellon conceded to LaHood during an election party Thursday night in Quincy. Mellon made it further this election cycle than the last time he was defeated in the primary. Making it this far, though, was not far enough.
I wouldn't say there's no victory, obviously. Like I said, there's no moral victories for me. It's a win or lose. That's just the way I'm wired. But I'm very happy with the amount of messages I got today. So I know people weren't voting for me just because of the party. They really believed in what I was saying.
LaHood will now have to resign from the state Senate, which means a new member will be appointed. Here's how that's going to work. The state Republican Party will take applications from those interested in filling the soon-to-be vacant seat. The GOP county chairman in the 37th state Senate district will vote, and the winner will hold the seat for the remainder of LaHood's terms. Votes will be weighted based on Republican voter turnout in each county in the 2014 primary. Now, the voting is expected to take place in the next couple of weeks. Later in the show, we're sitting down with Congressman-elect LaHood to discuss his win and what's next. Shifting gears now to Springfield, Republicans are standing up against a new plan by Democrats to fund state government. It's been more than 3 months since either side proposed a complete budget. Despite an exact supermajority in the House, most stopgap bills have never made it through to the end. However, most people haven't felt the effects of the impasse.
With schools opening, with state employees being paid, with a lot of programs being funded through court orders, that's good, but unfortunately you take away pressure points to get people at the table.
We don't have the money. And yet again, the Democrats are pounding down taxpayers' throats. More spending than we have dollars.
Republicans rebuffed Democrats for adding almost $2 billion in spending to a bill that will also release revenue from the lottery and motor fuel tax. This bill will head to the House, where it will need all 71 votes for a veto-proof majority. We've seen how difficult it was last week when the Democrats only got 70 members to Springfield. The House is not scheduled to be back until September 24th, meaning there will be no lawmakers at the Capitol this week. Thanks to those court mandates, Illinois has been open for business, but as that budget stalemate enters its 3rd month, some say the state won't be able to fully recover if a deal cannot be reached in the next few weeks. Lawmakers heard from more than a dozen groups Thursday morning in Chicago about how the budget continues to affect them. Courts have kept money flowing to almost 90% of the state, and while the court has protected many groups, it cannot create the funding needed to support them.
And at the end of the day, we are at a point where some hospitals may be forced to close their doors.
More than $60 million in Medicaid payments are owed by the state. Without new revenue or deep cuts, even budgeted items like school funding could be delayed. Since the courts took over, estimates show the state's deficit has climbed from $4 to $5 billion this year. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will force another vote on a resolution disapproving of the Iran nuclear deal. 42 Democratic senators were able to filibuster, blocking a Thursday procedural vote. 60 votes are needed to advance the measure to a floor vote. 4 Democrats have come out against the agreement. A vote on the actual deal must come before a September 17th deadline. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker making a stop in central Illinois last week. The presidential candidate spoke at Ronald Reagan's alma mater, Eureka College, in front of students and supporters discussing what he calls his day one plan, focusing on tearing up the Iran nuclear deal and repealing Obamacare.
We've got an idea to take and repeal Obamacare once and for all and put patients and families back in charge of your health care decisions and your health care dollars.
Walker calls the plan wreaking havoc in Washington.
That was a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I take responsibility.
For the first time, Hillary Clinton is apologizing for using a private email account while she was Secretary of State. She posted a note to her supporters Thursday saying, quote, "I should have used 2 email addresses. Not doing so was a mistake. I'm sorry about it and I take full responsibility." Before this, she offered an apology, but only for any confusion she may have caused. Race and politics, our panel talks about getting minorities involved in elections. And up next, we sit down with Congressman-elect Darren LaHood. Welcome back, and a welcome back to the show to now Congressman-elect Darren LaHood. Thanks for joining us, and congratulations.
Well, Paul, great to be with you and your viewers today. Thanks.
All right, so we're coming off the election now, a couple days later, so you've had a chance to digest it. But one of the things that I took away, obviously, other than your victory, was the turnout. Very low. Special election wasn't happening on a Tuesday, happened on a Thursday. How do we get people involved to the polls?
Yeah, well, I think it was a reflection of the circumstances of the special election, having it in the middle of the summer. We had a primary in July. Obviously, this was on a Thursday. People aren't used to voting. This wasn't an election that people naturally gravitated towards. It wasn't a presidential election. And, you know, obviously there's important issues out there, but voter turnout and democracy is important, and we have to encourage people to get out. But I think it was a reflection of a kind of a low energy campaign, and there wasn't a lot of issues that jumped to the forefront.
And in just a few days, you're going to be sworn in, and you'll start your work in Washington. And of course, nothing big going on there, except that the House is voting on the Iran nuclear deal. So you're going to jump right into that. We know that the Senate Democrats blocked a procedural vote so that the issue couldn't be taken up. So the issue seems effectively dead, but how important is it to get these votes on the record?
Well, I think it's important that voices are heard on this issue. Obviously, I want to read the agreement. I haven't had the opportunity to do that. I want to make sure I fully understand it, ask questions. I do have some real reservations about the Iranian regime and trusting them when they've really been untrustworthy for 25 years with any protocol or sanctions or any mechanism put in place. And so I have real reservations about the deal. I think in some ways it may make us more unsafe in the world and in the Middle East. And their rhetoric about Israel, wiping them off the face of the earth, death to America, you know, they're really ruled by a supreme leader that's a religious zealot. So there's real issues there. And at this point, you know, I'm leaning against, if I was fortunate enough to vote on it, to vote against it.
Another issue that you're likely going to get a chance to vote on is how to fund the government, and I know you've been big on infrastructure, roads and bridges, you know, repairing those roads we drive on. Congress is going to have to vote by the end of this month, likely on a continuing resolution as time's running out, to how to fund the government. And obviously there hasn't been a budget agreement as most people would like to see for several years now, and again, continuing resolution. How do you break that gridlock and get a firm funding plan in place?
Well, obviously I'm not there yet, but I'm going to try to learn as much as I can. But, you know, kind of this paralyzation of D.C., this gridlock has to change. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't serve any of us very well. It doesn't serve the economy well. I think people are frustrated with the lack of progress. And so I hope to be one voice and to try to change that. You know, in Springfield, I've tried to work across party lines on a number of issues, and I hope to do that in D.C., but I don't think we should be thinking about going over the fiscal cliff, because there's real ramifications for that. We ought to work together to come up with a solution to fund the government going forward. But you also have to remember we're $18 trillion in debt and going to $19 trillion. You know, we cannot continue to spend like we are. We got to reduce that debt on our kids and our grandkids, so fiscal responsibility is very, very important.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining the program. Congratulations on your victory. Again, Congressman-elect Darren LaHood. Still ahead, the On the Record panel talks race and the road to the White House. And Friday marked 14 years since the World Trade Center was attacked. We're looking at how the victims were remembered across the country.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Friday marked 14 years since the September 11th terrorist attacks that killed almost 3,000 people at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Karen Kafa reports on the memorials that took place at all 3 sites and across the country.
Sunrise Friday morning, an American flag unfurled over the side of the Pentagon, the start of a long day of remembrance in Washington, New York, and beyond. Later in the morning, a gathering to remember 184 people killed when Flight 77 slammed into the same wall 14 years ago.
The weight of their memory and our duty to honor it is something we do carry with us every day.
Near Ground Zero in New York, music and moments of silence for the moments when the first plane hit the first tower, the second plane hit the second tower, and then when each tower of the World Trade Center crumbled to the ground. And
Jonathan Stephen Ryan.
The long, somber roll call of each victim's name.
You are the reason that I wear this uniform and stand here today.
And in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a bell for the hero passengers of Flight 93, who kept that plane from hitting another target. Here in Washington, the President and First Lady joined White House staff in a moment of silence at 8:46 a.m., the moment Flight 11 hit the World Trade Center's North Tower. The President later spoke at Maryland's Fort Meade.
We do not forget those who were fallen. We are inspired by the survivors, many of whom still have the scars, both seen and unseen, of that terrible, terrible day.
Marking another year since the nation and the world changed. In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa.
To see how victims were remembered here in central Illinois, you can head over to our website, ciproud.com. Counting down the budget clock, do lawmakers have enough time to act, or will they kick the can? And we're talking race and politics, what the panel has to say about minorities and the road to the White House.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. Joining the panel this week, President of the Tri-County Peoria Urban League, Lorraine Bryson, and Hector Martinez, a Latino community advocate. Thank you very much to you both for joining the program. The reason I brought them on is because this week I wanted to tackle race and the race to the White House, because we've heard some inflammatory comments in this race about the Latino community and the black community, and we talked earlier in the program with Congressman-elect Darren LaHood about voter turnout, and there's obviously a connection between what minority voters or potential minority voters hear from candidates and whether they go to the polls. So, Hector, I want to talk with you first, because the Latino community is obviously a community that we've heard a lot about in past elections. Mm-hmm. What is the sense from the Latino community when it comes to presidential politics? And you hear people like Donald Trump and in the last race, Mitt Romney, who had some trouble getting Latino voters to support him.
Yeah, and also the Latino community was very involved with the last election and helping President Obama get elected. A lot of Latinos did vote, as they will again, I think, probably more so, I hope more so, in this next election. Probably the only good thing about, I don't want to talk too much about Donald Trump. He's in the media plenty these days. He has, of course, kind of sparked interest by the Latino community for this election, and definitely they have taken notice. There are a lot of people that are upset. I think we feel like, as a Latino myself, that we're targeted. Like in our history, some races have been targeted and to blame for things that are happening in our country. And I think that's wrong for any one person to do, especially someone who's running for the leadership of the country. That you're trying to target a race and blame a certain race for your problems. And I don't think that's the way to go.
Lorraine, we've heard the phrase Black Lives Matter now for over a year. Largely it was connected to police violence over the last year, but it's also become a focal point of the presidential campaign, particularly on the Democratic side. Is that campaign, we'll call it, helping raise awareness, or has it gotten to some points been to be too inflammatory for candidates to touch?
I think it's helped to raise awareness. In terms of candidates that have issues with it, we probably need to look at their history and their background and what they've done in terms of race relations and reaching out to people. It's unfortunate to me that whenever someone runs for office, then they want to interject race and minority groups and get involvement. But as a minority, I want to look at, what have you done when you weren't running for office? Did I know about you then? Were you interacting in our community? Were you providing opportunities for all races? And I think that Black Lives Matters is a movement that is a cry for, we need to look at what we're doing as a country and stop marginalizing people based on their race. We can't paint a whole race on one or two individuals. And I think that it has been a long-term issue in terms of Black Lives Matters, in terms of police brutality and the issues that have arisen. The only thing that has brought it to the forefront is cell phones and videos. Because if we didn't have some of the videos, we wouldn't have the evidence that we need to bring those crimes to the forefront.
Well, we've heard about Black Lives Matter being discussed on both sides of the aisle in this presidential race. Obviously, if you're a candidate, you want everybody to vote for you. But what do you think needs to happen for black voters to really turn out in this election where, unlike the last two elections where you had President Obama, you do have on the right Dr. Ben Carson as somebody who voters can see and kind of see a reflection of themselves in the black community?
Well, I think that once again, it's who you relate to. Prior to when President Obama ran, he was able to connect to people, due in large part because he was already in the community. In his prior offices that he held, he was already in the community and the people knew him. And I think that getting the vote out, it's always higher in a presidential election. Those off elections, it's lower turnout. But I think we all people can get out and vote a little bit more. I think a big issue is the Voting Rights Act. There are so many underlying issues that we don't talk about until it's election time, and that creates a kind of a bad spot for a lot of people.
Hector, also on the right, in addition to Dr. Carson, you have somebody like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz who have Latino backgrounds. What does that mean in this election cycle that on the Democratic side you have white candidates? Of course, you have Hillary Clinton, who, on the Republican side as well, Carly Fiorina. So you do have that female element to reach out to women voters. But Republicans this time around is the party that has candidates of color.
Yes, I think the Latino community, though, is really going to focus more on the immigration issue. I think there are a lot of people that might want to support and will support some Latino candidates, but it's all going to boil down to the issues and where they stand on the issues. Because not all of the Latino community is on one side of this immigration issue. There are people that were born here and feel that, as many other people, we need to have a wall, or we need to have stronger immigration laws. We need to try to keep the number of immigrants, to a certain level. And then there are those immigrants or Latinos that feel that, hey, everyone should have an equal opportunity to try to find a better life for themselves and their family, that this land is not really our land, it's land that we live on. There should be a way, legally for these people to come here, and we should try to keep people out, whether they're on the south border, north border, or coming overseas. And so, yeah, immigration is going to be an issue, and I think the Latinos are really going to look at where people stand, and I think everyone's waiting for after the primaries to do it.
Well, I think this is an issue we are going to have to discuss again, so we're going to have both of you back to continue this conversation as we get further into the election cycle. Thank you very much, Lorraine Bryson, Hector Martinez, for joining the program. Still ahead, a new report sheds light on how the CIA helped produce the Hollywood blockbuster Zero Dark 30. And countdown to shutdown, as Congress returns to Washington, they're staring down a budget deadline. A government shutdown is looming in Washington if lawmakers don't agree on a continuing resolution. The federal budget is still operating under sequestration, but according to the Washington Post, there's bipartisan support to lift the spending limits. A deal must be reached by September 30th. A federal judge on Wednesday ruling a case challenging the Affordable Care Act brought by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives can go forward. The case was allowed to proceed on claims concerning whether public monies were properly approved by Congress. Justice Department lawyers say the House has no legal standing to be in court. Booze, jewelry, and other gifts helped make sure the people behind the film Zero Dark 30 got help from the CIA. The revelation comes in a new report by Vice News. The presents were detailed in a CIA ethics report obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. Screenwriter Mark Boal and director Catherine Bigelow got access to the details of the mission that ended with Osama bin Laden's death. That's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can always stay in touch with us using social media and connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter. Just use the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.